forefather of Rome? Was it Esau? Esau is linked to Rome and by extension the Roman Empire. He helped give rise to the formation of numerous nationalities through conquest and by marrying into royal families. The ruling elites of many nations can be traced to his bloodline. So in the last session, we talked about Zepho, the grandson of Esau, and how he became king over Italy and ruled there for 50 years. Now, Europeans ignore the connection between Esau and the Italians, the Romans. Why are they trying to hide it? It's a curious thing. But let's remember what the Most High said in Jeremiah 49:10. I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. How would it be possible for Esau to hide himself? He mixed himself in with the other nations to the extent that he's unrecognizable. He is certainly mixed in with the legs of iron, the last empire in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We're talking about Rome, the legs of iron and feet partly of iron and clay. So let's look at how he tried to hide himself in the Roman Empire. Let's look at this from Smart History. This is talking about the Etruscans, an introduction. We need to know who these people are. It says, before the small village of Rome became Rome, a brilliant civilization once controlled almost the entire peninsula we now call Italy. This was the Etruscan civilization, a vanished culture whose achievements set the stage not only for the development of ancient Roman art and culture, but for the Italian Renaissance as well. Though you may not have heard of them, the Etruscans were the first superpower of the Western Mediterranean who, alongside the Greeks, developed the earliest true cities in Europe. They were so successful, in fact, that the most important cities in modern Tuscany, Florence, Pisa, and Siena, to name a few, were first established by the Etruscans and have been continuously inhabited since then. Yet the labels mysterious or enigmatic are often attached to the Etruscans since none of their own histories or literature survives. I wonder why. It says this is particularly ironic as it was the Etruscans who were responsible for teaching the Romans the alphabet and for spreading literacy throughout the Italian peninsula. Continuing, it says the Etruscan people may have derived from a lively mixture of land-loving locals and adventurous Near Eastern outsiders. They were neither natives nor invaders, but something in between, and a distinctive something they were. Although the Greeks call them Tarhinoi or Tersinoi, the Romans call them Etrusci or Tusi. The Etruscan called themselves Rosna or Rosina. They spoke a language that was unique in vocabulary and grammatical structure, different from any of the languages spoken by their neighbors. So this article from the Smithsonian is asking, where did the ancient Etruscans come from? It says a new DNA analysis suggests that enigmatic civilization was native to the Italian peninsula. It says before the glory of Rome, the Etruscans ruled much of what is now Italy. Some of Rome's first kings were from Etruria, and Etruscans may have founded the city-state that would dominate much of the known world for centuries. With a unique and still largely unknown language, this early civilization was substantially different from other Iron Age societies. Take note of the fact that this is happening during the Iron Age. So it says, they were boasting a sophisticated knowledge of farming, metalworking, and sculpture that strongly influenced ancient Greek and Roman culture. Now it says the Etruscans look indistinguishable from Latins, and they carry a high proportion of steppe ancestry. The civilization's still most indecipherable language is noticeably different from other societies of that era, but bears some commonalities with Greek, including similar alphabets. Indeed, Herodotus once speculated that the Etruscans were actually ancient Greeks from Anatolia. But it says usually when Indo-European arrives, it supplants the languages that were there before. It says the fact that the Etruscans were able to maintain their language despite waves of later migration testifies to the strength of their culture. The study suggests that the ancient society passed along linguistic characteristics to other civilizations that later emerged on the Italian peninsula. Let's see what else we can find out about these people. This comes from the Biblical Archaeology Society Library. It's entitled The Etruscans, Mastering the Delicate Art of Living. So they ask the question, do you ever wonder what happened to the ancient Etruscans, those civilized, seemingly mysterious people who revealed so many secrets of life and death to the Romans? So they're saying all you really need to do is take a look at some of the people in Tuscany, and you will be looking at the descendants of the Etruscans. It says recent DNA tests have shown that many modern-day Tuscans possess the same genetic makeup as skeletons unearthed from Etruscan tombs in the countryside surrounding Florence. Clearly, the Etruscans never went away, it says. Now it goes on to say central Italy before Roman times was populated with too many disparate tribes and peoples for modern scholars to connect any one of them securely with particular kinds of objects or burial places, especially in the absence of writing. But it says even in literate times, surviving epitaphs show that Etruscans regularly intermarried with Greeks, Latins, and Umbrians, as well as with other Italic tribes. But how long those Etruscans had inhabited Etruria before the 8th century BCE was a vexed question even in antiquity. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, describes the Etruscans as new arrivals on the Italian peninsula, colonists, led by King Turcinus, who had set out a few centuries earlier from Lydia in Asia Minor to escape famine. It says certainly the Etruscans maintained close contact with the Near East, especially, it seems, with the Phoenician colony of Carthage in North Africa. The dailyhistory.org tells us that the Etruscan civilization was an early civilization that inhabited Italy from Tuscany to Rome. It is little known and was largely forgotten until archaeological discoveries once revealed its power, complexity, and sophistication. The Etruscans had a unique civilization and culture. However, they made a decisive contribution to the history of Europe because they shaped in many ways the early development of Rome. Many of the most distinctive features of Roman society were in fact influenced by or directly borrowed from, borrowed, right, from the Etruscans. The Etruscans were a formative influence on Rome, and this can be seen in its religion, culture, urban planning, and engineering, and they also helped to establish it as a great city and one of the greatest powers in Italy. Listen, in order to understand Rome, it is necessary to understand the influence of the Etruscans on the early Roman Republic. It makes you wonder if they're ashamed of their history. But let's go on. It says Etruscan influence on ancient Roman culture was profound. It was from the Etruscans that the Romans inherited many of their own cultural and artistic traditions, from the spectacle of gladiatorial combat to hydraulic engineering, temple design, and religious ritual, among many other things. In fact, hundreds of years after the Etruscans had been conquered by the Romans and absorbed into their empire, the Romans still maintained an Etruscan priesthood in Rome. The Etruscan priesthood in Rome, which they thought necessary to consult when under attack from invading barbarians. Based on the evidence, it's saying that it seems very likely that the elite class of Etruria from around 700 BC onwards really did come from Anatolia. Listen, it says, from this evidence it seems very likely that the elite class of Etruria from around 700 BCE onwards really did come from Anatolia. Logically, this is the origin of the legend recorded by Herodotus regarding the origin of the Etruscans. However, what about common people? To what degree did the Etruscans as a whole come from Anatolia? Was it just the elite class, in the same vein as when the Normans invaded Britain, or was it a large migration in which a considerable portion of the Etruscan population came from Anatolia? Now I'm going to read some excerpts from this book called The History of Etruria to see if we can identify these people. It says the Etruscans appear not to have been a native people in Italy, but to have arrived there in ships from some foreign country about 1200 years before the Christian era. Some authors call them indigenous, but this merely means that they were settled in Etruria from the earliest period of Italian history of which we have any knowledge, and that the first dawn of civilization and literature in that land may be traced to them. In the same manner, when they are called by Pliny, Diodorus, and Dionysius the inventors of handmills, trumpets, prows, and of many arts and sciences, it merely means that they were the first introducers of these things into the peninsula. Their history naturally divides itself into 4 parts, which we shall treat of in order. So these are the 4 parts. The first part is from the settlement of the Etruscans in Italy to the foundation of Rome. The second is from the foundation of Rome to the death of Tarquin II. The third is from the death of Tarquin II to the death of Sylla. And the fourth, from the death of Sylla to the extinction of the Etruscan faith in the 4th century of the Christian era. Was it an extinction or syncretism? Let's go on. Now they're going to make some comparisons between them and the Egyptians. It says, we think from the striking similarity in religion and habits between the Egyptians and the Racina that a large colony from the city of Resen dwelt for a long time in Egypt, and that about 1260 years before Christ, or it may have been even somewhat later, they sailed from some part of Africa to seek new homes and new fortunes in Italy. Where did Zepho come from, family? He was in Africa. He was the captain of the host of the African army. It says, we think that had Herodotus written either Ludin or Lubia instead of Ludia, and Syrtes instead of Smyrna, his account would have given the real tradition of the people. It is almost certain that Herodotus must have been told Ludin for the country of the Racina, which he wrote Ludia, because the name Ludin is found upon the Egyptian monuments as the name of a series of nations triumphed over by the pharaohs 2 or 3 times before the days of Moses. And as it is evident that the story of Herodotus is not Lydian in the sense of Lydia proper, so we must suppose him to have confused the Etruscan account with the Lydian from similarity of names. So listen, it says, it seems then established by Greeks who were wholly unacquainted with Etruscan numbers, and by Latins who were acquainted with them, that the Terhini or Racina arrived in Italy about 1250 BC. Now, in confirmation of this, Varro tells us that the Tuscan annals were collected together and made into a written history in their 8th Seculium about the year 347 of Rome, which places the beginning of their era between 400 and 500 years before Rome. Cicero gives the same statement, and Plutarch tells us that in the year of Rome, listen, 666, an Etruscan Aruspex proclaimed that the Etruscan day of 1100 years, during which Jove Ortina had given them dominion, was near an end. And this again brings us to the same reckoning. It goes on to say the Romans took from the Racina the method of founding and consecrating cities, of constituting the Senate and government, and of ordering their colonies. So from these people, it's saying they learned the construment of walls, forts, and pomaria, the reckoning of time, literal characters, numerals, and coinage. From them they also learned the worship of Janus, the two-faced god, Hercules and Saturn, besides other gods and heroes. They learned from them the forms of declaring war and of making treaties, the use of augury, and of religious ceremonies, of military music and accoutrements, and it goes on and on and on. So these practices that are still being done in European nations are said to come from Rome. Now we know that they came from the Etruscans. It says, from them they also learned the science of cultivating land with agricultural instruments, the culture of the vine, the arts of statuary and architecture, the fabrication of pottery, the science of navigation, the construction of ships, magazines and armaments, the method of keeping their annals, and the useful practice of singing at feasts the praises of their ancestors. So listen, it says the wonderful similarity between the Racina and the Egyptians in religious dogmas, in the form of their furniture and pottery, their apparel and ornaments, their architecture and painting, their division of measurement of land, their military customs, arms, and discipline, but above all, in their funeral rites, has been frequently touched upon in this volume and will be referred to in more detail when we come to treat of the manners and customs of the Racina. It says, it is almost equally interesting to remark the strong brotherly likeness between the Etruscans and the Hebrews. So before they were making some comparisons to the Egyptians, like they have a lot of things in common. But now we need to look at how they compare to the Hebrews and what did they find out. It says the resemblance between the two people is so strong, arising from an identity of circumstances in many respects, that the Yehudis, when they became acquainted with the Etruscans, believed them to be the children of Esau, the brother of Jacob, and called them a race from Edom. Did you catch that? Israelites came in contact with the Etruscans and they were like, that's Uncle Esau. Family recognized family. They called him out like we're trying to do in this awakening. We're trying to get people to see who he is. You have to look at his actions. You can't just look at his skin color. Esau conquers by the sword. He will get what he gets through war, pillaging, genocide, colonization. We're looking at him almost every day in the news. It says, we observe, however, this great difference between the two. The Hebrews, an unwarlike race, went into a warlike and highly civilized country, the inhabitants of which were continually influencing them to adopt their customs, though to their own hurt. Now I want to share some images of these people and see if we can connect some dots. This image is from the sarcophagus known as the sarcophagus of the spouses. It's supposed to be a masterpiece of Etruscan art, now in the Louvre Museum. But take a closer look at this one. Do they look European, or do you see other features there? Take a look at this one. This is depicting a joyous Etruscan banqueting scene on the rear wall of the tomb of the leopards in 480 BCE. Now it seems apparent that there are melanated as well as non-melanated folks involved here. And that is how we can describe Esau's family. He married Ishmaelites, dark-skinned people, and the Neanderthals from Mount Seir would have had fair skin. So this is a good representation of his seed. This one is a painting from an Etruscan tomb in Italy. And again, we see those with very dark skin and those of a lighter hue. Let's take a look at this one. We're seeing Etruscan musicians, and this is from the 5th century. It's a fresco in the tomb of the leopard at Tarquina. Now, I thought this one was extremely strange. What do you see here? Centaurs, right? Look at the color. Let's find out a little more about this one from thoughtco.com. It says, one iconic feature of Etruscan art is a procession, a line of people or animals walking along in the same direction. These are found painted on frescoes and carved into the bases of sarcophagi. The procession is a ceremony that signifies solemnity and serves to distinguish the ritual from the mundane. The order of the people in the procession likely represents individuals at varying levels of social and political importance. The ones in front are anonymous attendants carrying ritual objects. The one at the end is often a figure of the magistrate. In funerary art, processions represent preparations for banquets and games, the presentation of tomb offerings for the deceased, sacrifices to the spirits of the dead, or the deceased trip to the underworld. So they're making a trip, or the deceased is making a trip to the underworld. Interesting. This one is called the Feast of Lars from the 3rd to the 2nd century in the Tarquinian tomb of the Shields. Interesting, right? because they are clearly showing us what that population looked like. It was certainly a mixed race. This article from the collector is confirming that the Etruscans had a profound influence on Rome. It says the Etruscans are widely known for being the mysterious neighbors of the Romans. What is not so well known is that they had a profound impact on Rome's development. Now, when you consider that Zepho ruled for 50 years in Italy, he would have certainly brought the knowledge from the places where the Edomites lived, Mount Seir, Petra, and certainly Africa. So this says the Etruscans were closely involved in the development of early Rome, and many of Rome's most famous cultural features can be traced back to them. To address this tragic lack of awareness about the importance of the Etruscans, this article will examine some of the many ways in which the Etruscans contributed to Roman society. So it tells us one of the most surprising contributions that the Etruscans made to early Rome was that of many ruling class Roman families were actually of Etruscan origins. So it talks about how some of them had held the consulship in Rome. One was a dictator, and there were other prominent families that continued in those roles for centuries. And this part is key because Esau joined himself to the ruling class. They were members of the royal families, and that bloodline didn't just end. Many of the elite in European nations, especially British nobility, still use their hereditary titles, like Duke, even though they won't admit where it came from. Let's go on. The article also tells us that several of Rome's early kings were Etruscans. It mentions the fourth king named Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, and it says he allegedly lived around 600 BCE, not long after Rome was founded. It goes on to talk about the examples of the distinctive buildings that the Etruscans created. The one on the left is a temple of Jupiter in Rome. Now compare it to the one on the right in Petra. So it says the Romans adopted the use of what is known as the Tuscan column. This was first used by the Etruscans as an adaptation of the Greek Doric column. The Romans favored this Etruscan-style column for military buildings due to its strength. Interestingly, archaeology has confirmed that the first truly monumental buildings in Rome were Etruscan in origin. Let's look at this from the conversation. It says, challenging the whiteness of classics, remembering the black Romans. This says there is every reason to think that many leading Romans were, in our terms, black. It says Septimius Severus was a Roman general who became emperor in 193 CE. He was born in Leptis Magna in modern Libya. Almost all depictions of Severus are statues or on coins. They show him as having curly short hair and a beard, which is sometimes forked. But it says such depictions do not represent his skin pigmentation. It says, but unusually we have a painting, this one that you see, of Severus, the Severan Tondo in the Altes Museum in Berlin. The Tondo shows Severus, his wife, and his children. And it's saying the graying Severus clearly has dark skin. Painted depictions of emperors circulated widely, partly through the military and partly through imperial cult. As we can see in this bust of Severus himself in the Archaeological Museum in Greece, there can be little doubt that this is what people thought Severus and his family looked like, and yet Severus's blackness has historically been questioned. So obviously melanated people were there. But more importantly, we need to know who they were, because when we get into the session about the Edomite priests and kings, we need to understand that Edomites had already established a relationship with the ruling class in Rome long before Messiah was born. He hid himself among the ruling elite. In today's time, we would consider them to be the superpower nations, namely the Europeans. But we can't say he's only black or only white. Esau is the end of the world. So look for him to hold positions of power, particularly positions that oppress our people. The other thing to look for is how he gets and maintains control. Warfare is the name of the game for him. He goes into nations and commit genocide and then take on the identity of those people. It should be fairly obvious. So Esau believes he's on top of the world right now, Mr. Untouchable. But listen to this from Obadiah 1:6-7. Oh, how Esau shall be searched out, how his hidden treasures shall be sought after. All the men in your confederacy shall force you to the border. The men at peace with you shall deceive you and prevail against you. Those who eat your bread shall lay a trap for you. No one is aware of it. It's the nations he's entrusted himself to. They're going to prevail against him. He will reap what he has sown. Esau's day will come. So we will pick up here next time. Please remember to hit the like, share it, and you're welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload the messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Join me next time.